Welcome to Black Horizons. I'm your host, Chris Moore. Tonight, we're going to spend this half hour talking about Martin Luther King Jr. with some people who met him and whose lives he touched. Join me as we celebrate and honor in his memory. Here tonight are three individuals whose names and faces may be familiar to many of you. Reverend Leroy Partick, the former pastor of Bethesda Church in Homewood, who met the young Dr. King at seminary. Dr. Delphina Briscoe, the retired principal of Lyons Middle School, who heard Dr. King speak at Ebenezer Baptist Church. She was a very young child then. And last but not least, Dr. Reverend J. Van Alfred Winsett, pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Dr. King gave many of his speeches when he was here in Pittsburgh. Welcome to the program, all of you. Now, many people don't know they celebrate Dr. King's birthday this month, and they hear that I Have a Dream speech, but Dr. Briscoe was kind enough to bring an album titled The Great March to Freedom. We have a section of that speech because Dr. King actually delivered that speech several times, and he delivered it as early as 1963 in Detroit, Michigan. Let's listen to that and look at some of the photos from this album.
And so I go back to the South not in despair. I go back to the South not with a feeling that we are caught in a dark dungeon that will never lead to a way out. I go back believing that the new day is coming. And so this afternoon I have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day, right down in Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to live together as brothers. I have a dream this afternoon that one day, little white children and little Negro children will be able to join hands as brothers and sisters. I have a dream this afternoon that one day, men will no longer burn down houses in the Church of God simply because people want to be free. I have a dream this afternoon.
You can hear some obvious differences as he warmed up the crowd in Detroit and in the speech that he finally gave in Washington, D.C. Dr. Briscoe, as a young member of Ebenezer Baptist Church, you heard Dr. King address the crowd there once, right?
Yes, I did, Chris. It was so invigorating. I remember sitting in the balcony, and we weren't allowed as youngsters to sit in the balcony because Mom said things happen too much in the balcony. You sit on the main floor. And so we were on the first row in the balcony, and this young man stepped out. And as I said, I was just going into high school when Dr. King came to the Ebenezer Baptist Church standing room only. I could just remember as if it happened day before yesterday. And of course, when he started to speak, I was just in awe. I had never heard anyone speak like Dr. King. And so he affected my life, all of my life, to this very day. And I have lived by a lot of his principles. I've taught by a lot of his principles. I've administrated by a lot of his principles and continue to live by, because truly he was a man of God. He incorporated not only theology, but the social climate of the day. And that to me is so important in today's life.
Reverend Partick, I want to turn to you because you also met him, but you were pastoring a church near Philadelphia and going to a seminary to take some extra classes when he was a young seminarian. Is that right?
Yes, he was entering Crozer Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania. At that time, Crozer was in Chester. Since then, it has merged with Rochester, and Rochester, New York. It's moved from Chester. But that was way back in 1942, 43, a long time ago.
Wow.
I had gone to Chester to be the pastor of the Thomas and Thomas Presbyterian Church there. And I went over to Crozer to fill in some gaps in my seminary training. You know how it is. You come out and you feel, well, I got to get some more training here, you know. So I went over there to do some work. there were maybe half a dozen African Americans on the campus, and one of them was Martin Luther King. The other was Sam Proctor. No, you remember Sam Proctor?
Yes, sir.
Well, Martin Luther King was a very serious young man. Seemed to be knowing what he wanted to do, but quite intent upon proving himself. Now, he maybe spoke with more respect to me because I was considerably older than he. You know, a young man from the South tended to respect his elders, you understand. But that was way back then, and so I came to admire this serious student, and to see. I confess I didn't see the icon he was going to become. I didn't see that in him. Now I don't want to pretend I saw more than was there, but I saw a young man who, for the first time, was studying in a seminary, white seminary. You see, he'd come out of the South, where he'd been in black schools all his life, and here now you got to prove. You don't always have to prove that you're as good as anybody else.
I've read in Taylor Branch's book, Parting the Waters, about Dr. King, that his father did not want him to go to Crozer, to the white seminary. He thought his whole future was there in the South, in the black church, and he didn't see the need for further education. You know anything about that?
No, I know that there was some question about whether he should attend or not, but I think that he had a sort of mind of his own, and he felt he needed a new, from what conversation I had with him, it seems that he felt he needed a new kind of experience, and Crozer was a new kind of experience now, because the courses were quite rigorous. You had to know what you were doing. And,
is that part of what helped him, you think, develop into such an eloquent speaker?
I don't think it was so much eloquence as a speaker, because I don't think he had that much time to speak on that campus. He had to spend more time in the library preparing for those classes. But I think it gave him the background upon which he could build when he went up to Boston to the Boston School of Religion, which is part of the Methodist Church there at Boston University. And he there began his real speaking eloquence.
All right. Dr. J. Van Alfred Winsett, it's good to have you back here. You knew Dr. King also, not necessarily as the pastor of Ebenezer when Dr. King came here to speak, because you only came in '76, but you knew him from living in Louisville, Kentucky. You knew his brother, right?
I knew his brother, I knew his mother, I knew his father. Martin Luther King was a member of our convention, and we had a lot of interactions with Dr. King because of my relationship with his brother, A.D. Williams King.
Was this a National Baptist Convention?
National Baptist Convention,
Okay.
USA Incorporated. And Dr. King was a member of our convention, his brother, his mother, his father. So we got to know him quite well, but I got to know him quite well because of my relationship with his brother. His brother pastored Zion Baptist in Louisville. So we had become very close. Martin many times would come to Louisville just to rest and relax. So we'd all go down to A.D.'s house to fellowship one with the other. And he was a fun-loving person, but he was a very serious-minded person. I'm not sure that even in his young life that he could envision that he would ever rise to the heights that he did. But as you know, he has left for us a legacy that we all can be proud of.
Dr. Winsett, do you think that somehow the sharp edges of Dr. King have been sort of sheared off or dulled in some ways? Prior to his death, he had made a speech at the Riverside Church in New York where he really condemned the Vietnam War. He talked about a nation being spiritually bankrupt that spent more money on defense and military than it did on programs of social uplift. Do you think that sometimes we just remember, I have a dream, and we're probably guilty of it too, having played part of that speech here today?
Yes, well, many people were very critical of him when he had the audacity to talk about the war and some of the social issues that we are faced with. But I think that now when we look back in hindsight, I think that he was a man even before his time. Many people were afraid to speak out against such that we were going through at that particular time, but not him. there seems to have been something within him that was moving him forward to attack many of the social problems that we had here in America. And even today, as we look back, we can see that he was a person who was able to look way down the road when many people were just looking just as far as their nose.
Old men will have dreams and young men will have visions.
That's the Bible.
And sometimes I guess when you have that kind of vision, you're a little bit ahead of the crowd and they don't see where you're coming from. I can remember when he spoke out against the war on Vietnam, my father and several of his friends were saying, well, the civil rights movement must be dead. Why is he speaking out against the war? A lot of people didn't understand where he was going. You think, Dr. Briscoe?
I think not. As Dr. Winsett has said, he was before his time. And as I listened to a lot of information, especially the album that you played at the beginning, I listened to those speeches and said, gee, this was an old man in a young man's body. And then too, his books are so alive, and they have so much to offer everybody, no matter what age you are.
Now, I understand you have a book on your lap. What's the title of it?
It's called Strength to Love.
And I understand,
my favorite.
And I understand this is your second edition of it. You actually wore the cover off the other one. It was so dog-eared. You used it often when you were teaching, when you were a principal and an administrator. How did it help you get through the day? And can you read us one of your favorite passages?
It talks about a tough mind and a tender heart. And I like to think that as a leader, I had those characteristics of being tough-minded, but yet soft-hearted enough or tender-hearted enough to understand the children and the staff and those persons that I had to work with. The one passage that I really love, tough-mindedness without tender-heartedness is cold and detached, leaving one's life in a perpetual winter devoid of warmth and spring and the gentle heat of summer. It just seems that his words always would flow from one concept to another concept. And then he went on to talk about God lies in the fact that he is both tough-minded and tender-hearted. He has the qualities both of austerity and gentleness. And I am so thankful that we worship a God who is both tough-minded and tender-hearted. And that's one of my favorite chapters, along with Shattered Dreams. And I'll tell you why Shattered Dreams is so close to my heart also.
Why?
Well, you said that we would talk a little bit later about our present status at Ebenezer.
Yeah, for people who may be watching and don't know,
well,
the church
because our church
down.
did burn March 13th, 2004, as we all stood there shivering and in tears and heartbroken. And yet, I look at the shattered dream, but shattered dreams do come true. And I'm sure that Dr. Winsett will talk a little bit about the shattered dream that's going to come true.
All right,
and that's why it's so close to my heart.
All right, we'll talk about that in just a second. Reverend Patrick, when you moved here in the early 1950s, you became a civil rights leader in your own right. And I can remember you telling me a story about going to the Highland Park pool. I wish you would relate that to our audience right now, because I admire you so much. I have to say it publicly. You're one of my heroes out there, and I admire you so much for what you did in the movement here when you came to Pittsburgh. Can you tell us about that?
Well, Pittsburgh has its own brand of apartheid. And part of that was that blacks, African Americans, were not to swim in Highland Park pool. That was not our pool. Our pool was on Washington Boulevard, somewhere where the fire department has its place now, you know, in that area. There was a little pool there that was called Akewell, and that's where we were supposed to go on a hot summer day. And when you passed there, we were filled with youngsters jumping in out of that water. However, I didn't come here to change things. I was sort of catapulted into that matter.
Like Dr. King. In Montgomery, he was catapulted into that, I think.
In a way, yes, yes. My young people at the church had been associated with a white group, And the group decided that it would have a swim-in at the Highland Park pool on a Saturday morning. And my young people came to me and said, you know, Reverend Partick, we can't swim in Highland Park pool. And I said, you know, I was from Philadelphia. Why not? Well, we're not allowed. I said, oh, we'll swim there. We'll swim there. Come on now. But then I inquired, we weren't supposed to swim in Highland Park pool. So I went down to City Hall, I must say. I was not seeking martyrdom, you understand. I went to City Hall and I spoke to a fellow named Chris Moats, who was the chairman of the Civic Unity Council of that day, precursor to the FAPC, precursor to the CHR, Commission on Human Relations. And I said, Chris, we're going to swim in Highland Park pool, my young people and I, and we're going to need as many policemen as you think we need to keep us from being beaten. Well, he thought it was not a good idea. I said, well, we're going to swim now. I'm coming to you because you're the chairman of the executive of the Unity Council. Well, that was, I suppose about 7 days beforehand. There was a meeting with Reisdorf, who was the director of City Parks and Recreation. We had a meeting another meeting in the YMCA, which is then in East Liberty. And they were trying to say it was not a good idea. I said, well, you know, it's an idea. We're going to be there on Saturday morning. Saturday morning came. Well, it was really, you said 1 o'clock. We had said we'd meet. I was there at 1 o'clock. We said we'd meet at Rhododendron Grove. If you know Highland Park, Rhododendron Grove is about a block away from the pool itself, block and a half. And I went to the pool itself. 1 o'clock came, and there were about 500 policemen around that pool. Blue, every 3 feet there was a blue shirt. Blue shirt, blue shirt, blue shirt.
Thank the Lord.
Yeah. 1:30 came, my kids hadn't shown up, and the lieutenant then in his white shirt. Where are your people? I said, I think there's probably a misunderstanding. Maybe they thought we were going to meet at the pool. They may be still at the Grove. So I'll have to go and see if they're still there. I went to Rhododendron Grove, and there were a dozen young people there. About a half dozen girls and a half dozen boys. I said, come on, let's go in the pool. The girl said, I don't like to swim. The boy said, well, I didn't swim my trunks, so I didn't bring my trunks. One boy, a fellow named Jesse Bell, said, Reverend Partick, I have my trunks and I have an extra pair. I said, come on, give me that extra pair. And I grabbed him and I grabbed the fellow next to him and I said, we're going to the pool. We started toward the pool. And the closer we got to the pool, the harder it was to keep them walking. I dropped arms with it, you see, I had them. They were kept on. I'm locking arms now, I gotta get back.
They can't get away from you now, right?
I laugh at it now, but that day, we got to the pool, we got into the dressing room, and a policeman came in. And, we went through the shower, we jumped in the water, and every white person in the pool jumped out of the water. Now, Highland Park is really a fairly big pool, too big for 3 people. And I'm not a swimmer. When I go into a pool, I go to the shallow end where I can stand up, because I never had swimming lessons, so I just self-taught. So I don't go to deep water. These young men could really swim. And they'd go up on the high diving board to jump off the board, and I admired them so much. Now, I must say, one was a very dark fellow, and one was sort of light fellow. I was also happy to see a dark fellow because I said, here it is present. You must always want to see here. But you from a distance, you couldn't tell well, the Jezebel, you know, it's like you
what did some of the people do? They splashed some water?
Well, the people were around the pool. They were just around grabbing up water, hurling epithets at us. Water, nigger water, black water. Well, we pretended not to hear that and not to notice that. And we kept on swimming. Finally, after about, I suppose about 25 minutes, my young people came and said to me, Reverend Patrick, can't we go now? I said, no, we can't go. No, I said, no, we can't go yet. We can't go yet. I felt we had to stay a little bit longer to make a statement, you see, with all those policemen there, with the whites now gathering around the fences looking at us. We had to stay a little bit longer.
I think that's reminiscent of the Montgomery bus boycott and what you were trying to do. I can't believe the time is going so fast. Reverend Van Alfred Winsett, I have to ask you about Ebenezer and the rebuilding and what's going on. Could you update the general public of what's happening? Because we can always remember that horrible Saturday morning. I could see the smoke from my house, and I said, wow, something's on fire. And I turned the TV on, and I was amazed to see the flames leaping through the roof of your church.
I was amazed to see it, and I was right there when it started. The rebuilding is coming along very well. I think, you know, when we burn down, we are starting from scratch, which means that
even the new wing had to go, is that right?
Even the new wing had to go. We were starting from scratch, which means that you have all these city permits and other zoning permits and so forth that you have to go through in order that you can have somebody to come in and start laying blocks. So what we've been doing is going through all of the processes, making sure that every I was dotted, every T was crossed, and the city is making double sure because of the fact that we had such a great loss. And they want to make sure that we follow all of the directions that they're giving. That's what we plan to do.
When do you expect to have the facility rebuilt? And I know you've dedicated something to the memory of those firefighters who lost their lives there, too.
Yes, we would hope that the end part of 2005 would find us in the building, if all goes well. We're still mindful of the firefighters who lost their lives. I'm in contact with the families, with the widows, and my heart still goes out to them because I don't think that that they will ever get over that tragedy that happened.
With the time that we have remaining, I'd like to start with you, and it's not much. Dr. King, his memory, rebuilding the church, what does it all mean to you now?
Well, as Dr. King was faced with a great when he was faced with something as great as trying to change the complexion of America, or trying to change the direction of human society, I find myself perhaps walking in waters that I've never walked in before.
It's very similar. Dr. Briscoe, and you?
Well, I look at Dr. King and John Kennedy as one and the same. John Kennedy, too, was an idol of mine. And I still read his works and what they believe in for the people of America, of all colors. And shattered dreams, as I said, do come true. And as a member all of my life of Ebenezer, I know that that shattered dream will come true.
Last word to you, Reverend Patrick. We only have a few seconds.
Well, I have a slightly different take on Martin Luther King Jr. and his philosophy. I think one has to restrain evil in this world, and I don't think you can do it and using his philosophy. Now, he was effective, you understand, because he's in the Anglo-Saxon judicial system. It would not have been effective in a Russian system or the German system of the later day. So I've always had a slightly different take on that. One must restrain evil, and sometimes you have to use methods that evil, that love abhors. Now, that's a different take on things.
It certainly is. Dr. Patrick, we'll end it there. I thank all three of you for being here as we remember Dr. Martin Luther King. We appreciate it.
Thank you.